Is load velocity profiling or force velocity profiles something you keep hearing in sports science but you don't know what it is? Well, I'm here to explain. Simply breaking down the word into load velocity, force velocity, load, jump height are just the two variables, and then a profile is simply just describing the athlete based on how they perform relative to those two variables and data points. I'm Matt Tomez, and I'm a sports performance coach / sports scientist, and I'm here to explain all about load velocity profiles. Not to get into all the nuances and the super specific details, but a very brief overview and explain what they are, why you use them, and how you can start doing it in your job. Ever thought algebra would come back from middle school? Well, here it is. But this time around, it's a little bit more cool and a little more exciting because it has to do with sports and training. But simply put, a load velocity profile is just 4 plus multiple data points of those two variables, assessing the relationship that is individual to each athlete for how they perform a specific movement or exercise. Load and velocity have a negative relationship. So as load increases, velocity decreases. But each athlete's ability to handle heavier loads or to move weights fast will be different depending on the exercise. So to perform a profile, we'll use the trap bar deadlift for example. The athlete will perform 4 doubles or 4 sets of 2 at increasing weights. You'll track the bar speed of every rep, taking the best average bar speed at each weight. You'll put that in a scatter plot and create a regression or a line of best fit, and that'll spit out an equation for you. Or if you're doing sprinting, you do 4 sprints with increasing resistance on a sled, the 1080, whatever it may be, and then you track the best 5-meter velocity, 5-yard velocity for each weight. And then you put the weights on the x-axis, and then you put the best 5-yard velocity on the y-axis, create a regression. Here's where algebra comes back into play. So the equation, y equals mx plus b. Y is your velocity, m is your slope, just a number that's calculated from the regression. X is your load, and b, calculated from the regression, is your max velocity, or velocity when load is 0. Because there's certain relationships and certain things we know about training, for example, 50% velocity, half of your best velocity, is max power. We can use algebra to work backwards to figure out how much load to use. So if b is our max velocity, we'll take half of that. So let's say b is 7 meters per second if we're sprinting. I put 3.5 in for y because that's the velocity I want to run at. So 3.5 equals m, which is already calculated, x you leave as x, plus b, which is 7. Then you just work backwards and solve for x, and that tells you how much weight to use to run at 50% of your max velocity or max power. And the same thing works for lifting. If I want to lift at 0.7 meters per second for accelerative strength, I put 0.7 in for my y, m and b are already calculated, so then I just solve for x to figure out how much weight to put on the bar for the velocity to be 0.7 meters per second. I just do this in Excel. Some softwares will automatically do it for you, but if you want a tutorial, just comment down below. Load velocity profiles have 2 main uses, the first being as an assessment tool and for testing and retesting. Because it's a profile, it's describing the athlete's ability to perform a certain exercise or movement. You can assess changes over time because it has a very consistent set of protocols if you do the same thing for the testing and also the retesting. And you can evaluate certain aspects of the profile, such as did the y-intercept or max velocity improve? Did the slope become less steep so they are able to tolerate load a little better to assess and evaluate progress? The second being individualized prescription, just how you would program 70%, 75%, 80% of a 1 rep max for, let's say, a back squat, for example, because everyone has their own equation for a certain exercise, their profile, you can do the exact same thing. So if you want everyone to run at 50% velocity decrement, 25% and then 10%, you can calculate what every person's individual load has to be to run at that velocity. Or if you want to lift at 1 meter per second, 0.75 meters per second, or 0.5 meters per second, Using everyone's own equation, you can tell each athlete what to put on the bar to get those velocities. Some of the benefits of load velocity profiling is it's just a more holistic assessment. Instead of just looking at one rep and the ability to handle extremely heavy max loads, you're looking at their ability over a variety of loads, and by doing so, you can take out some of the potential outliers because you're creating a regression based on all of those data points as opposed to just one. One of the main drawbacks is that the athlete has to be extremely familiar with the exercise or movement you are doing the profile on. I would not have an athlete their first time in the facility, even if we're not going that heavy, to get a true assessment because they aren't that familiar. They don't know how to truly go for velocity on that given exercise. Lastly, some of the nuances of profiling, mainly you'll just learn over time, but for the protocols, for example, some people use only 2 data points, some people are comfortable with 3. I like doing 4. Some of the distances, for example, in a sprint profile, you're supposed to decrease distance over time. So we got 30 yards, 25, 20, 15. I just found that 15, even though it's the slowest, isn't long enough for them to reach their true max velocity for that resistance. So I do 30, 25, 20, 20. Small things like that you just pick up over time. Something else is the R value, or how well those 4 data points actually make the regression. I heard somewhere that 0.95 was a good regression, but in my experience, 0.98, anything less than that is pretty inconsistent. You should probably do it again. So small things like that you'll just pick up over time. That is a general overview of load velocity profiling and just profiling in general, what it is, how you can use it. So happy profiling.